The Inheritance Betrayal, a complete narrative. I was 42 years old when my siblings taught me that family is just a contract written in blood, and those contracts can be broken for the right price. That price, in our case, was exactly $2,075,000. My name is Mark. I own a small, specialized architectural firm, nothing fancy, but I make a good, solid living. I've always been the quiet one, the responsible one, the executor, the one who cleans up the messes. My father, Richard, died on Friday, May 12th, 2023. It was sudden, a heart attack, but peaceful. He was 75, and we were incredibly close. He was a pillar in our small Ohio town of Willow Creek, owning and running Davies Hardware, a place he built from nothing 30 years ago. The business, the land it sat on, and his portfolio were worth just over $3 million after taxes. My mother passed years ago, so Dad's estate was always going to be split between his 3 kids: me, my older sister Laura, and my younger brother David. Laura was 46. She lived in the suburbs, married to a finance guy, and they always thought they were better than us small-town folk. She was demanding, always needed the best, and never understood the concept of saving. David, 38, was the black sheep, a perpetual entrepreneur, which meant he was always failing and always hitting Dad up for cash. Dad loved us all, I truly believe that. But he saw us clearly. He saw Laura's entitlement, and he saw David's recklessness, and he saw my loyalty. Dad was generous to a fault, especially with Laura and David. Laura needed a down payment for her house back in 2015. She needed $150,000 and promised to pay it back. Dad wrote it off as a gift, but I knew he resented the lack of gratitude. He felt used, and that feeling festered, changing the way he looked at his own children. David was worse. He ran through business ideas like water: a specialized coffee shop, a vintage video game store, and a bizarre pet-sitting app. Each venture collapsed within 18 months. Dad bailed him out every time. I tracked it once in a dark moment. $250,000 over 5 years. Every check written was accompanied by a sigh, a shake of his head, and a quiet request for me to watch the books. I never asked Dad for anything financial after I finished college. I took a loan, paid it, and built my life. He respected that. We had a bond based on mutual hard work and discretion, a bond the others seemed incapable of forming. About 3 years before he died, in April 2020, Dad started hinting about his will. He didn't trust them. I remember sitting in his study, the smell of old wood and pipe tobacco filling the air. It was a Thursday evening, I think April 9th. "Mark," he started, his voice low, "I'm worried about what happens when I'm gone. Laura will try to liquidate the hardware store immediately. David will blow his share on another useless scheme." I didn't say anything. I knew it was true. It was a heavy truth that we both carried silently. The standard will, the one from 2008, splits everything equally, he continued. But that's not fair anymore. You're the only one who deserves the store. You're the only one who knows how to keep money. That conversation led to months of careful planning. Dad didn't want to disinherit them completely. He just wanted to protect his legacy, the business, and make sure his money went to someone who wouldn't waste it. We spent evenings, sometimes hours, going over the numbers. The total estate value was roughly $3 million. We had to figure out a distribution that looked fair on paper but accomplished Dad's goal of protecting the main assets. It wasn't easy. The planning sessions felt less like estate management and more like strategy for a corporate takeover, with my own siblings as the hostile party. On August 1st, 2021, we signed a new will with Dad's new attorney, Mr. Thompson, 3 towns over. It was complex. It named me as the sole executor and gave me the controlling shares of Davies Hardware, valued conservatively at $750,000. The remaining liquid assets, The stock portfolio and bank accounts totaled $2.3 million. It was a massive amount of cash that would inevitably cause a war. The new will stated that I, Mark Davies, would receive 50% of those liquid assets. The remaining 50% would be split equally between Laura and David. This meant the overall split was heavily weighted toward me, justifying the years of uncompensated support I'd given Dad and, crucially, recognizing the years of financial drain caused by my siblings. Here was the first subtle hint of trouble, something I ignored because I was too focused on Dad. After the will signing, Dad handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't open this until 2 weeks after I'm buried, Mark. It's for your eyes only," he instructed. His eyes were deadly serious. His gaze held a mixture of sadness and grim determination. He knew what was coming. He just wanted to make sure I was ready for it. I slipped it into my safe deposit box, never thinking about what it might contain. I just trusted him. I trusted the plan. Dad passed away in May 2023. The funeral was quiet, respectful. Laura cried dramatically, a loud, theatrical display that felt more about performance than grief. David looked stressed, probably checking his accounts and calculating his future share instead of listening to the eulogy. I was numb, grieving my best friend. I didn't open the envelope on the scheduled date. I couldn't bring myself to focus on money. I just wanted to mourn. The task felt sacrilegious while the wound was still so raw. Exactly 3 weeks after the funeral, on Friday, June 2nd, 2023, at 9 a.m., I called Laura and David. "We need to meet for the reading of the will," I told them. "Come to the house this Saturday. Mr. Thompson will be here." Laura's voice was instantly cold. "Why is a lawyer coming to Dad's house, Mark? This should be done at his office. Are you trying to control the meeting already?" "It's what Dad requested." I lied smoothly. I needed them to be on my turf. I needed the home field advantage. He wanted us all together in his study, where he felt closest to Mom. I should have known her suspicious tone was a foreshadowing of the war to come. But I didn't. I just wanted the official part to be over so I could finally begin to process my loss. I should have known that they weren't mourning a father. They were mourning a financial asset that had just died. The meeting took place on Saturday, June 3rd, 2023, at 11 a.m. Mr. Thompson, a quiet professional man, sat across from Laura and David in Dad's study. The tension in the small room was thick, like stale smoke. Thompson read the will. It was standard boilerplate at first, detailing the burial wishes and minor bequests. Then he got to the meat of it. The executor of the estate, Mark Davies, shall receive all ownership and controlling shares of Davies Hardware. This asset shall be valued separately from the liquid portfolio. David scoffed, crossing his arms tight across his chest, his face already turning red. "Wait, what? The store? He gets the whole store?" Thompson continued, unperturbed. "The remaining liquid estate, totaling approximately $2.3 million, is to be divided as follows. Mark Davies shall receive 50%, and the remaining 50% shall be split equally between Laura Davies and David Davies." Silence. David's mouth dropped open. Laura shot out of her chair, knocking her mahogany chair against the wall. "Are you telling me this is a 75% to 25% split?" Laura's voice rose to a shriek, a high, piercing sound I'd only heard when she was truly furious. "Mark gets 3 times what we get? That's ridiculous. That's not what the 2008 will said. Where's the original will, Mark?" I stayed calm, folding my hands on the desk. "This is the current, legally binding will, Laura. Dad changed it in 2021. This is manipulation," David shouted, his voice cracking. He couldn't have been in his right mind. "He was old, Mark. You probably badgered him into this. You're the lawyer in the family. You know the loopholes." I wasn't a lawyer, just an architect, but the implication was clear. I was a con artist who had exploited his ailing father. Thompson cleared his throat. "I can assure you, Mrs. Evans, Mr. Davies was of sound mind. I conducted the review personally and found him to be fully capable of making testamentary decisions. Laura ignored him completely. She pointed a manicured finger right at my face, her polish flashing under the desk lamp. "You wanted the store, you conniving snake. That store has the land. It's worth more than the rest of the estate combined. You undervalued it. You've cheated us." She was making excuses. Doubts were planted in her mind, not mine. They instantly shifted from mourning siblings to financial adversaries, a transformation that took less than 30 seconds. The next few weeks were a nightmare of increasing tension. I tried to talk to them, to explain Dad's reasoning, that he wanted the business to survive, that he'd already given them so much money over the years. "It's not about the money we had," Laura said during a phone call on Tuesday, June 20th at 7:30 p.m. "It's about the money we deserve. Dad would never intentionally exclude us. Mark, you coerced him. You preyed on his weakness." "I did no such thing, Laura," I countered, the calmness in my voice starting to crack. "You know Dad would give you the shirt off his back, but he was furious about the $150,000 you never repaid." "That was a gift," she yelled. "I need my full share. My husband's business is having issues. I need the money immediately. You're holding up our lives." There it was. Not grief, but financial necessity. The entitlement was raw, exposed, and ugly. David, meanwhile, had stopped calling me and started sending vague, accusatory texts. David's text, Wednesday, June 21st, 1:15 p.m. "I'm talking to Dad's old friends. They all say you've been manipulating him for years. This isn't over." I ignored the threats, focusing on the executor duties. But the red flags were multiplying. I realized they weren't just angry. They were organizing their attack. The next pattern interrupt came on Monday, July 10th, 2023. I got a call from my Aunt Clara, Dad's older sister. She sounded nervous, her gentle voice fluttering. "Mark, honey, I'm worried. Laura called me. She asked me if Richard seemed confused in his last months. She asked about his memory." Clara sounded deeply troubled. She pushed hard. "What did you tell her, Aunt Clara?" I asked, my blood running cold. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. They weren't just fighting the will. They were attacking Dad's competency. I told her he was sharp as a tack, but she kept pushing. She said, "Clara, be honest. Mark has him isolated. Did he look sick? Did he seem like he forgot things?" I hung up on her, Mark. I should have known. Attacking the will is one thing. Attacking the testator's state of mind is a legal nuclear option. They didn't want the estate to be split. They wanted to wipe the slate clean, prove the 2021 will was invalid, and revert to the equal split of the $3 million estate. I finally pulled the sealed envelope from my safe deposit box on Thursday, July 27th, 2023. I sat in Dad's study. The leather felt stiff and old in my hands. I opened it carefully. Inside, there was a single, handwritten note and a certified bank statement. The bank statement was the key. It was from a small, local credit union, one none of us had ever used. The balance was $75,000. The account was solely in my name, established December 20th, 2021. The note read, "Mark, this account is for you to hire the best shark in the state. I know what they'll do. Use this to fight them. Keep the faith. Love, Dad." I looked at the note and then the bank statement. It wasn't just a premonition. It was a premeditated defense. My chest felt tight. Couldn't breathe for a second. Even in death, Dad was looking out for me, anticipating the greed of his other two children. He wasn't just my father. He was my first and most loyal client. The discovery gave me cold, hard determination. I called Mr. Thompson that afternoon. I knew exactly what my next move had to be. I called Mr. Thompson that afternoon. I knew exactly what my next move had to be. "Mr. Thompson," I said, skipping the small talk. The envelope contained $75,000 for a legal fight. I need you to find me the most aggressive, most expensive lawyer in the state. I need a shark. Thompson paused, probably taken aback by the cold precision in my voice. He'd known Dad for years, and he knew me as the quiet, reliable one. Mark, that is substantial. Your father was very wise, he finally said. I know just the man. George Reynolds, based in Cleveland. He doesn't take small cases, and he doesn't lose probate disputes. But he's expensive. The money is set aside specifically for him. I confirmed. I don't care what he costs. I care that he wins. I met George Reynolds on Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. I walked into his skyscraper office in the city, feeling like a small-town boy out of water. He was sharp, intimidating, and wore a bespoke suit that probably cost more than my first car. I handed him the sealed note and the bank statement proving the $75,000 defense fund. Reynolds read the note twice, and then he looked up, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. Your father was a genius, Mark, Reynolds told me, leaning back in his leather chair. This preemptive strike shows foresight, intent, and, most importantly, awareness of the potential conflict. It completely undercuts their primary strategy. Their strategy, he explained, was simple: undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. They would argue that a confused, elderly dad was manipulated by his favorite, lawyer-like son, me, in assigning a new will that unfairly favored him. This note destroys their claim, Reynolds stated, tapping the paper. It proves Richard was sharp enough to anticipate their actions and fund your defense 2 years before he died. I signed a retainer papers that same day, committing to the fight. I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't fighting alone. I was fighting alongside Dad's memory and his brilliant foresight. The lawsuit landed on my desk on Monday, August 7th, 2023, at 10:45 a.m. It wasn't a shock, but seeing the official paperwork still hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. Laura and David were the plaintiffs. The charge was exactly what Reynolds had predicted. The legal language was cold and clinical, but the meaning was screamingly clear. We think you cheated our father, and we are coming for our full $2 million share of the estate. I was 43 now, and they were trying to ruin me. I called Reynolds immediately. The papers are here, George. What now? I asked, my voice flat. Now, we let them spend their money, Reynolds chuckled, a dry sound. They've asked for discovery. We give them everything. Every phone record, every email, every bank statement. The preliminary discovery phase was brutal. They subpoenaed my bank records, phone records, and email archives dating back to January 2020. They were looking for any sign of coercion, any paper trail showing I pressured Dad or isolated him. I gave them everything, every document, every text message, because there was nothing to hide. My relationship with Dad was built on mutual respect, not manipulation. They, on the other hand, had to turn over their financials, showing the immense debt they were in. That's what Reynolds wanted. He wanted to establish motive, greed, not justice. David's filing showed over $180,000 in outstanding business loans. Laura's were worse. Her husband had lost a shocking amount in a poor investment, and they were facing foreclosure on the house Dad helped them buy back in 2015. The tension in the family was unbearable. My sister Rose, a stepsister from Mom's side who Dad adopted, but who remained neutral in this mess, called me on Wednesday, August 16th, 2023, at 9 p.m. Mark, honey, I'm worried. Laura called me. She asked me if Richard seemed confused in his last months. She asked about his memory. Clara sounded deeply troubled. She pushed hard. What did you tell her? Aunt Clara. I asked, my blood running cold. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. They weren't just fighting the will. They were attacking Dad's competency. I told her he was sharp as a tack, but she kept pushing. She said, Clara, be honest. Mark has him isolated. Did he look sick? Did he seem like he forgot things? I hung up on her, Mark. I should have known. Attacking the will is one thing. Attacking the testator's state of mind is a legal nuclear option. They didn't want the estate to be split. They wanted to wipe the slate clean, prove the 2021 will was invalid, and revert to the equal split of the $3 million estate. I read the text 6 times, then 7. Then I lost count. I had to make her understand. This wasn't about a better split. This was about the cold, hard realization that my siblings were monsters who would use legal means to destroy a father's last wishes. I knew, however, that the $75,000 fund and my clean record weren't enough for the viral element that Reynolds needed. I needed the real hammer, the one that would crush their entire narrative, the evidence. I remembered a strange detail from a conversation Dad and I had in November 2022. He was worried about the safe deposit box. They're going to go after the contents of the box, Mark. They think I squirreled away cash, he told me. They think the land and the store are undervalued. They think there's a secret stash. There isn't a secret stash, Dad, I had responded that day. He gave me a weary look. There isn't a cash stash, no. But there's a secret, Mark, and it's in the second box. I hadn't needed to do the swap yet, but I realized that day that Dad had an exit plan for everything. It was a pattern interrupt in my grief. I had been so consumed with the primary will and the defense fund that I completely forgot the annual ritual. Every year on his birthday, he'd take me to lunch and we'd visit the bank. It wasn't just to see the main box. It was to pay the annual fee on a smaller, secondary one. I mentally checked the date he had rented it. January 5th, 2022. I drove to the bank on Thursday, August 24th, 2023 at 1 p.m. I walked in, my heart pounding a heavy rhythm against my ribs. I opened the main safe deposit box, the one they knew about. It contained the original 2008 will, the one they liked, some old stock certificates, and family photos. Mundane, designed to look exactly like the retirement storage of a sentimental man. I signed the slip and returned the main box, then casually approached the teller, Mrs. Peterson. She'd known me since I was a teenager. Mrs. Peterson, I think I misplaced the paperwork for Dad's secondary box, the small one. Can you check box 41B? She frowned, checking her ledger carefully. Yes, Mr. Davies. Box 41B. Your father requested only you have access, Mark. He designated you as the sole co-signer back on January 5th, 2022. I signed a slip, my hand shaking so badly I almost tore the paper. This was the moment. The key fit, the latch clicked, and I pulled out the slim metal box. It was so light. It couldn't hold cash or gold. Inside, there wasn't money or gold. There was a single, unmarked USB drive, small and black, and a folded sheet of paper. I drove straight home, pulling into my driveway at 1:55 p.m. I couldn't wait another second. I ripped the paper open first. It was Dad's familiar, elegant handwriting, slightly shaky toward the bottom. Mark, if you're reading this, they've sued. Play the file on the flash drive for Reynolds immediately. You'll know why. I walked from the kitchen to the study, the room where the war started, and jammed the USB drive into my laptop. It held one file, Laura David meeting.mp3. The file was time-stamped, November 18th, 2022, 4 p.m. I remember the date. It was a Friday afternoon. Dad had called me that morning, asking me to grab a specific, rare piece of machinery from a supplier 45 minutes away. It's urgent, Mark. We need it for the Henderson job, he'd said. The Henderson job was minor. The urgency felt forced now. I clicked play, my study filled with the low-quality audio of 3 voices, Laura, David, and a third, unfamiliar male voice, an attorney. The sound was muffled, as if the recording device was hidden under a pile of magazines or a cushion, but the voices were clear enough. The audio began with a cough, Then the unfamiliar attorney speaking. Unfamiliar voice, attorney. So, to recap, you're looking for a strategy to invalidate the current 2021 will, which gives the majority to your brother, Mark. This will requires evidence of undue influence. Laura, on recording, he's too careful. Mark's always been the golden boy. Dad gave him the store, which is undervalued. The land alone is worth at least $400,000. Her voice was hard, cold, without a hint of sisterly warmth. David, on recording, we need to go for the incapacity angle. It's cleaner. We wait until Dad is weak, right? We wait until he's 80. Then we claim he's incompetent, force a sale of the hardware store, and split the cash 3 ways. He followed this with a short, cynical burst of laughter, tinny and evil, cutting through the static. Unfamiliar voice. That's a very long-term plan, David. Your father is only 75. Laura, then we need to accelerate the narrative. We have to start claiming coercion now. It's better to claim he was always confused, even going back to the will signing in 2021. I'll start calling Aunt Clara, asking about his memory. Plant the seed now. That way, when he dies, it looks premeditated on Mark's part. I stopped the recording. My hand was shaking so violently I couldn't hold the mouse steady. I leaned back, hitting the high back of the chair with a dull thud. My chest tightened. Couldn't breathe. I was gasping, pulling in air, but nothing felt like oxygen. They were planning this while he was alive. They weren't just fighting the will. They were plotting to destroy Dad's reputation and mine purely for financial gain. They were already planting the seeds of his alleged dementia with Aunt Clara 3 months before he died. I hit play again. I needed to hear the rest, needed the details to sink in like a surgical procedure without anesthesia. David, what if Mark shows the previous gifts? The $250,000 Dad gave me for the app, or Laura's $150,000 down payment. Laura, we claim those were gifts, not loans. We deny any debt. Mark can track it all he wants. If the will is invalidated, all previous gifts are irrelevant. We get the full $1 million each. The recording was exactly 23 minutes long. It detailed their entire strategy, the plot to attack Dad's mental capacity, the plan to liquidate the hardware store, and the timeline they had established to exploit their own father for the maximum profit. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. Everything. I gave him everything. My trust, my patience, my devotion to Dad's legacy. They were plotting to destroy it all, even while my father was alive. I remember the date of the recording again. November 18th, 2022. Dad and I had just gotten back from lunch. He had asked me to run an errand, leaving the study empty. I pictured him in that chair, setting the small recorder under the cushion, knowing his children were about to sit there and plot his demise, financially and personally. The quiet, devastating betrayal. The realization hit me. Dad wasn't paranoid. He was protecting me from them. He didn't just write a will. He built a fortress. He was the most loyal client I could ever have, anticipating the cold-blooded treachery of his own flesh and blood. The coffee on the desk went cold in my hands. The room spun slightly. I read the transcript in my head. Mark has him isolated. Did he look sick? I could almost feel their eyes on me now. Years of subtle jealousy and resentment finally exploding into open war. I looked down at the $75,000 bank statement Dad had left me. It wasn't just to hire a lawyer. It was an investment in my sanity. He knew the truth would be horrific, and he wanted me armed. I had to move. I had to use this weapon. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about avenging my father. I immediately called Reynolds. It was 3:15 p.m. He picked up on the third ring. "Mr. Reynolds," I said, and my voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, strained, and filled with a cold, desperate resolve. "Stop everything. I found the evidence. It's a recording. It proves everything." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It proves they premeditated the attack on Dad's capacity while he was alive, and it lays out their exact plan to liquidate the hardware store. They even mentioned the $400,000 land valuation. Reynolds went silent. Long silence. It was the only time I ever heard the great George Reynolds speechless. "Mark," he finally said, his voice now lower, dangerous. "You just won the war." I wasn't done, though. I told him about the second box, about the annual ritual, and about the exact date the recording was made. I told him about the look on Dad's face when he gave me the first sealed envelope. Dad knew George. He knew exactly what they were. "We need to use this. We need to crush them." "We will," Reynolds promised. "But we won't show the recording to their lawyer immediately. We're going to set a trap of our own. We will offer them a final, private mediation. We will let them present their entire case. And then, Mark, we give them the USB ultimatum." I agreed. The confrontation had to be public enough to shame them, but contained enough to keep the recording out of the initial court records. Reynolds wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized they'd been played. I wanted to witness their downfall. I wanted to see them shatter. I owed Dad that much. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of quiet preparation. Reynolds moved to schedule the private mediation, arguing it was a final, good-faith effort to avoid costly litigation. Laura and David agreed immediately. They were so confident in their fabrication, in the seeds of doubt they'd planted about Dad's mind, that they walked right into the ambush we set. The mediation was set for Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. It was the day I would finally face my siblings, armed with the undeniable truth. And I knew that day would change everything, not just legally, but permanently. They were about to pay the price for their greed, a price far higher than the $2 million they were seeking. The private mediation was set for Wednesday, September 13th, 2023 at 9 a.m. in a sterile conference room in a downtown Columbus law firm. Neutral territory, but the atmosphere was anything but. I arrived with George Reynolds. He looked like a predator sensing blood, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his eyes sharp and assessing. He carried nothing but a slim leather portfolio and a small, unmarked black USB drive. Laura and David arrived together, trailed by their lawyer, a man named Mr. Harrington, who looked nervous. Laura wore a crisp white suit, a uniform of false confidence. David looked twitchy, unable to meet my eyes. They hadn't spoken to me in weeks, communicating only through furious, accusatory legal filings. The room was furnished with a large mahogany table, bottles of sparkling water, and notepads. We sat facing each other, me and Reynolds on one side, Laura, David, and Harrington on the other. The mediator, a kindly, silver-haired judge named Ms. Wallace, sat at the head of the table. Ms. Wallace began with the usual platitudes about compromise and saving the family, but the words fell flat. This wasn't about compromise. It was about judgment. Harrington spoke first, laying out their case. He painted a picture of my father, Richard Davies, as a man in rapid decline in his final years, frail and easily influenced. The evidence shows that Richard Davies was growing forgetful, confused, and was increasingly reliant on Mark, Harrington stated, citing Aunt Clara's concerns. Mark, the executor, isolated his father and exerted undue influence to rewrite a long-established, equal will, simply to enrich himself and steal the family business. Laura jumped in, leaning across the table, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Dad was confused, Mark. You kept us away. You knew we would protect him from your schemes. David followed, his voice hitting a frantic, aggrieved pitch. It's all about the hardware store. It's worth more than the $750,000 Mark claimed. He lowballed the valuation so he could steal the land and the business, leaving us with crumbs. They spent a full hour constructing their edifice of lies. They offered letters from people they'd manipulated into thinking Dad was confused, all citing odd behavior in the months leading up to his death. They argued that the 2021 will should be thrown out and the estate reverted to the 2008 equal split will, giving them over $1 million each. They finished, settling back into their chairs, looking triumphant. They genuinely believed their manufactured reality was impenetrable. Ms. Wallace looked over at Reynolds, who hadn't spoken a word, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Reynolds," she prompted gently. "Your rebuttal?" Reynolds pushed his chair back slightly and fixed Laura and David with a look of utter contempt. His voice, when he spoke, was low, calm, and utterly lethal. "We have heard a long, elaborate, and frankly, insulting fiction concerning the mental state of a great man, Richard Davies," Reynolds began. "The plaintiffs claim Mark Davies exerted undue influence. We claim Richard Davies was not influenced at all. We claim he was, in fact, laying a legal trap." Harrington scoffed. "A trap, Mr. Reynolds? That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Reynolds opened his portfolio. He didn't pull out documents. He pulled out the sealed note and the bank statement. He pushed a photocopy of the note toward Ms. Wallace. "Exhibit A," Reynolds announced. "This is a note handwritten by Richard Davies to his son, Mark, dated December 20th, 2021, 4 months after he executed the new will. It was sealed in an envelope and deposited in a bank vault, with instructions not to open it until after his burial." Ms. Wallace read it aloud. "Mark, this account is for you to hire the best shark in the state. I know what they'll do. Use this to fight them. Keep the faith. Love, Dad." Laura's face went white. David started stammering. They looked completely blindsided. "This is irrelevant hearsay." Harrington sputtered, scrambling to grab the note. "On the contrary," Reynolds countered smoothly. "This note proves Richard Davies was not only of sound mind, but had uncommon foresight. He anticipated this very lawsuit, the one his children were planning, and armed his executor with a $75,000 defense fund. Does that sound like a confused old man or a shrewd businessman preparing for war?" The air was thick with their panic. Laura leaned over and hissed something in Harrington's ear. But Reynolds wasn't done with his preamble. "However," Reynolds continued, his voice dropping another octave, "we realize that a simple note, while legally devastating, doesn't address the core issue of motive and malice. The plaintiffs have spent an hour convincing you that Richard was a victim. We are now going to prove that they, the plaintiffs, are the true villains." He reached for the small, black USB drive. "What is that?" David asked, his voice a tremor of fear. Reynolds held the drive up for everyone to see. "This is Exhibit B. It's a recording made by Richard Davies on November 18th, 2022, at 4 p.m., while the plaintiffs were meeting with their own previous attorney to discuss how to invalidate the 2021 will." The room exploded. "You can't do that!" Laura screamed, jumping halfway out of her seat. "That's illegal. That's surveillance." "Ohio is a one-party consent state," Reynolds replied, his face a mask of stone. "Richard Davies owned the home. He recorded a conversation held in his own study. It is perfectly legal and devastatingly admissible." Harrington looked physically ill, rubbing his temples furiously. He knew the fight was over, but he had to object. "We haven't had time to authenticate this file, Ms. Wallace. This is an ambush." "It is indeed an ambush," Reynolds agreed, without apology. "But it is an ambush of the truth. Ms. Wallace, I request 23 minutes of your time." He plugged the USB into the laptop, connected the audio out to the room's speaker system, and pressed play. The muffled, low-quality audio filled the silent room. The opening cough, then the unfamiliar attorney's voice. "So, to recap, you're looking for a strategy to invalidate the current 2021 will." Laura made a strangled sound, like a broken sob and a gasp combined. She looked at David, and David looked back, the shared terror on their faces reflecting their immediate, awful realization. Dad knew. Dad recorded us. The voices continued, their past venomous words now echoing in the present. Laura, on recording, he's too careful. Mark's always been the golden boy. The land alone is worth at least $400,000. David began shaking his head violently, a repetitive tick. Stop it, Mark. Stop this. David, on recording, we need to go for the incapacity angle. It's cleaner. We wait until Dad is weak, right? We wait until he's 80. Then we claim he's incompetent. David was sweating profusely. Laura was crying. Not her theatrical funeral tears, but genuine, broken tears of shock and shame. The audio reached the point where Laura detailed the plot to poison Aunt Clara's mind. Laura, on recording, I'll start calling Aunt Clara, asking about his memory. Plant the seed now. That way, when he dies, it looks premeditated on Mark's part. At this line, Laura put her head in her hands, her shoulders convulsing with sobs. She had been caught, completely exposed. Her lie was now history, recorded and played back for a former judge and her own lawyer. When the 23 minutes of pure malice and plotting finally ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Ms. Wallace, the mediator, stared at the table, her expression grave and disappointed. Harrington, their attorney, finally broke the silence, his voice hollow. Ms. Wallace, we need a recess. No, you don't. Reynolds cut him off. We are here for mediation. The plaintiffs brought a malicious lawsuit based on a prefabricated, months-long conspiracy against their father's competency and the executor's character. Now that the truth is out, the mediation is over. The only thing left to discuss is the consequences of their actions. David, finding his voice through his terror, mumbled, "We withdraw the claim. We withdraw the lawsuit. We'll take the 25%. Too late," Reynolds said, crushing them utterly. "You committed perjury by claiming Mark Davies engaged in undue influence, knowing this recording existed, and you actively attacked Richard Davies' capacity. But that, sadly, is only half of the betrayal." I hadn't seen Reynolds move so fast. He reached into his portfolio again and pulled out a simple, sealed bank envelope from Davies Hardware's petty cash vault, dated October 3rd, 2022. This was the twist I hadn't known about. This was Dad's true final weapon, the $5,000 in stolen cash. Before we conclude, Reynolds continued, "We have one more piece of evidence that reveals the true nature of the plaintiff's desperation and deceit, extending far beyond the will." He pushed the petty cash envelope across the table. It was empty, but the label was what mattered. The label, in Dad's familiar handwriting, read, "Petty cash discrepancy, October 3rd, 2022. $5,000. In October 2022, Richard Davies discovered $5,000 missing from the store's petty cash vault, Reynolds explained calmly. He ran the inventory. He checked the security footage, which we have, if necessary, and he determined that David Davies, on October 2nd, stole $5,000 cash from the vault, justifying his actions to Laura by claiming the money was owed to him for a previous, non-existent debt. Laura's tears stopped instantly. She looked like she'd been punched. David covered his face with his hands and let out a wretched, defeated noise. "The $5,000 is small, a pittance compared to the millions you're fighting over," Reynolds pointed out, his voice dripping with disgust. "But it proves a pattern of petty theft and fundamental dishonesty." He turned to Laura. "And what did you do, Laura? When David showed you the cash, you knew it was stolen from your father's business. You didn't stop him. You asked him to put $2,000 toward your overdue mortgage payment. You were complicit in petty felony theft against the very father you claim to be defending. That was the real cost of greed. They weren't just plotting a massive theft. They were nickel-and-diming their dying father, stealing cash from his till just weeks before they planned the legal assault. It wasn't about principle. It was about predatory, immediate financial need. David, you committed a crime against the business, Reynolds finished. Laura, you committed a crime by receiving stolen property. Your father knew. He tracked it, and he decided not to report it to save the family honor. Instead, he left the paper trail, the empty envelope, as a final testament to your character. Reynolds then looked directly at Ms. Wallace. We asked the court for two things, Ms. Wallace. First, the immediate dismissal of their malicious lawsuit with prejudice. Second, we will file a motion for the recovery of all legal fees associated with this frivolous and malicious case, including the cost of my retainer and all court fees, to be charged directly against the remainder of their 25% share of the liquid estate. He stood up, signaling the end of the mediation. He had done more than win the case. He had incinerated their dignity and their finances in one swift, devastating move. Laura and David, humiliated, broken, and exposed, sat frozen in their seats. Harrington was already packing his briefcase, his face set in professional defeat. He didn't even look at his clients. Ms. Wallace nodded slowly, her judgment already clear. Gentlemen, Mrs. Evans, the mediation is terminated. The court will be informed of the findings. I left the room with Reynolds, not looking back. I walked past my siblings, who were two shells of the entitled people I had known. The silence was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The official court motion was filed the next morning, September 14th, 2023. Reynolds didn't ask for a settlement. He asked for total legal victory and financial penalty. The final legal step before the courtroom was the judge's ruling on our motion for summary judgment and sanctions. We knew the recording and the $5,000 paper trail made their case indefensible. The only question left was how complete the legal banishment would be. I walked into the courtroom 3 weeks later, not for a trial, but for the final ruling. I was about to find out exactly how much of their inheritance would be swallowed by the cost of their own greed and malice. I walked into the courtroom on Monday, October 9th, 2023, at 2 p.m. for the final hearing on our motion for summary judgment and sanctions. It wasn't a trial. It was the formal execution of a verdict already decided by their own malice. The courtroom was quiet, the air stale with the weight of formality. Laura and David were there, sitting separately, huddled around a visibly defeated Mr. Harrington. They looked ragged, the shock from the mediation session still etched on their faces. Laura's crisp white suit was gone, replaced by a drab blazer. David's usual bluster had evaporated entirely. He looked like a child caught stealing candy, not plotting multi-million-dollar fraud. I sat with George Reynolds. He gave me a brief, sharp nod. Stay calm. Don't react. This is Dad's victory, Mark. Just watch it happen. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance entered. She was known for her strict adherence to procedural fairness and her extreme intolerance for bad faith litigation. She wasted no time on pleasantries. We are here today regarding the motion for summary judgment and sanctions filed by the defense, Mark Davies, against the plaintiffs, Laura Evans and David Davies. Judge Vance looked directly at my siblings, her expression a study in stern disappointment. The court has reviewed the entire record, including the transcripts and the audio recording designated as Exhibit B. She paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle. First, the motion for summary judgment is granted, the judge declared. The court finds that the plaintiffs, Mrs. Evans and Mr. Davies, failed entirely to establish any genuine issue of material fact regarding the decedent Richard Davies's testamentary capacity or the exertion of undue influence by the defendant. The evidence provided by the defense, specifically the decedent's preemptive defense funding note and the audio recording, incontrovertibly demonstrates the decedent's awareness and foresight regarding this litigation. Laura flinched, biting her lip so hard I thought she might draw blood. David just stared blankly at the witness stand. Therefore, the last will and testament of Richard Davies, dated August 1st, 2021, is declared valid and uncontested. The estate distribution, including Mark Davies's 50% share of the liquid assets and the full ownership of Davies Hardware, is affirmed. The store was safe. Dad's legacy was secure. A powerful wave of relief washed over me, a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. The core battle, the defense of Dad's character, was won. But Judge Vance wasn't finished. She moved directly to the matter of sanctions. Second, we addressed the motion for sanctions, she continued. This is not merely a case of a disputed will. The record shows that the plaintiffs engaged in a months-long, coordinated effort to fabricate a narrative of incompetence and undue influence while the decedent was still alive, and further compounded this misconduct by filing a lawsuit containing knowingly false representations to this court. She shuffled her papers, leaning into the microphone. Such conduct constitutes litigation in bad faith, designed solely to harass the executor and circumvent the clear wishes of the testator. The court must impose severe sanctions to deter such malicious behavior and compensate the defendant for the extreme burden and cost of this frivolous action. Her voice rose slightly, emphasizing the final word. The court grants the defendant's motion for the recovery of all reasonable attorneys' fees and litigation costs, and further imposes a punitive sanction against the plaintiffs, jointly and severally. The words punitive sanction echoed in the large, mostly empty room. Harrington's face was the color of slate. Mr. Reynolds, please submit your final accounting of fees and costs, incorporating the punitive sanction, for approval. Reynolds stood up. He walked to the clerk and submitted a single sheet of paper. He turned to face the room and, without needing to be asked, began to read the cold, hard numbers. The accounting of banishment. Your Honor, the total liquid estate subject to distribution is $2,300,000, Reynolds began. The plaintiff's total combined share, as per the valid 2021 will, is 25% of that amount, or $575,000. Laura and David combined were due $575,000. The amount seemed vast, but Reynolds was about to demonstrate how quickly malice could consume it. The total legal fees incurred by the defendant, Mr. Mark Davies, defending against this malicious and frivolous lawsuit, amount to $185,000, Reynolds announced. This included his massive retainer, the cost of forensic analysis on the USB drive, and all court filing fees over the contentious period. Laura gasped a short, sharp intake of air. They had just lost almost a third of their total inheritance to my lawyer. Reynolds continued, his tone clinical. This includes the balance of the defense fund provided by the decedent, which was $75,000, meaning the remainder owed by the plaintiffs is $110,000. But the worst was yet to come, the punitive element. Further, Your Honor, Reynolds stated, the gravity of the plaintiff's fraud, conspiring to commit theft, making false statements to the court regarding the decedent's capacity, and the $5,000 cash theft from the business, necessitates a significant punitive sanction. We request a sanction equal to 25% of the plaintiff's gross distribution. A punitive sanction of 25% of $575,000 came out to $143,750. This money would be returned to the estate and added to my 50% share, effectively reducing their payout and increasing mine. David finally spoke, his voice weak. Your Honor, we can't afford that. That's cruel. Judge Vance slammed her gavel once, a loud, decisive crack. Mr. Davies, this court finds your malice cruel. The sanction is appropriate. Mr. Reynolds summarized the final distribution. Reynolds laid out the final, devastating math. Plaintiffs, gross inheritance, 25% $575,000. Deduction 1. Defendant's legal fees owed, minus $110,000 after applying Dad's $75,000 defense fund. Deduction 2. Punitive sanction, 25% minus $143,750. Deduction 3. Costs of their own counsel, estimated minus $100,000, Harrington's estimated fee, which he was now legally entitled to recover from them directly. The total financial penalty against the plaintiffs, Mr. David Davies and Mrs. Laura Evans, amounts to $353,750, Reynolds concluded. The room was silent as the judge nodded, approving the figures. Plaintiff's net remaining inheritance, $575,000 to $353,750 equals $221,250. Laura and David, who had sought over $2 million combined by invalidating the will and liquidating the store, were left with a combined total of $221,250. This amount would be split between them, meaning each sibling walked away with $110,625. They had spent nearly $354,000 trying to steal money, only to walk away with $110,625 each, barely enough to pay off a fraction of their respective debts. The greed had been astronomically expensive. They had paid $3 in sanctions for every dollar they received. Judge Vance issued her final order. The remaining sum of $221,250 will be disbursed to the plaintiffs within 30 days. Mark Davies is released from his executorship duties concerning this matter. Case dismissed. The gavel came down, sealing their fate. The execution and the aftermath. We left the courtroom without a word to them. Harrington attempted to approach Reynolds, but Reynolds simply held up a hand. You'll bill your clients directly, Mr. Harrington. The court order is clear. Over the next month, I worked tirelessly to execute the remaining elements of the will. I managed the final accounting, calculated the distributions, and arranged the wire transfers. The most difficult task was securing Dad's ultimate wish, the future of Davies Hardware. Dad hadn't wanted me to run the store long term. He had wanted me to protect it from David and Laura. His true legacy was my ability to be the responsible steward. I found a buyer quickly. The current store manager, a woman named Sarah who had worked there for 20 years and loved the business as much as Dad did. The sale price, fully validated by independent assessors, was indeed the original, conservative $750,000 stated in the will. I sold it to Sarah on favorable terms, keeping the property in the community just as Dad would have wanted. The proceeds of the sale, $750,000, were added to my portion of the liquid estate. Finally, on Friday, November 17th, 2023, at 4:30 p.m., I initiated the final wire transfers. Mark Davies' final tally: 50% original share, $1,150,000. Punitive sanction share, $143,750. Davies Hardware sale, $750,000 total final inheritance. Mark $2,043,750. Laura and David's final tally combined $221,250. I didn't celebrate. The money was a cold comfort. The cost of this process had been the complete and permanent loss of my family. My relationship with my sister Rose, the neutral one, was strained, though we spoke occasionally. But with Laura and David, the break was absolute. The permanent ban, the final, pathetic attempts at communication came right after the bank transfers were confirmed. David tried first, a long, rambling email sent on Saturday, November 18th, 2023 at 9 a.m. David's email. Mark, we didn't have to do this. You took everything. We're family. I need my full share. My debts are crushing me. I'm sorry about the petty cash, but that was just a loan, I swear. Please, brother, we need to talk. You're keeping Dad's money from us. It wasn't fair. I didn't respond. He had acknowledged the $5,000 theft, not as a crime, but as a loan. He still couldn't grasp the depth of his ethical failure. He still blamed me for keeping Dad's money, never admitting he destroyed his own claim with his own malice. Laura was next. Her message was a voicemail left on my office phone on Monday, November 20th, 2023, at 11:45 a.m. It was manipulative and desperate. Laura's voicemail, partial transcript. Mark, I know you think you won, but you lost your sister and your brother. Dad would be devastated. He would want us to forgive each other. I'm going to lose my house. I'm telling your kids what you did to us. You're a cold, unforgiving person. Call me back, Mark. We need to figure out how to recover from your selfishness. The message was a dizzying spiral of projection. She accused me of selfishness, refusing to acknowledge the 23 minutes of audio where she plotted to ruin me and callously smeared our father's name to Aunt Clara. She believed that simply saying Dad would be devastated magically negated her documented conspiracy. I deleted the voicemail. I changed my office phone number and blocked both of them on all social media, email, and mobile devices. The only communication I ever authorized was a formal, single-sentence letter sent via Reynolds' office. Laura Evans and David Davies. Mark Davies considers all personal and professional ties permanently severed. Any future communication will be treated as legal harassment. This was the final act of justice. It wasn't just a financial banishment, it was a relational one. They were excised from my life, their malice neutralized. Reflection and the true legacy. It took months for the dust to settle, for the bitterness to fade, and for the cold reality of the situation to sink in. I often sat in Dad's study, where the whole thing started and where the recording was made, and thought about the true meaning of his actions. Dad hadn't been testing us. He had been preparing for the inevitable. He saw the rot in his other two children, the entitlement in Laura, the recklessness in David, and he realized that the only way to save his legacy, and potentially me, was to preempt their actions with irrefutable evidence. The $75,000 for Reynolds was not just a defense fund. It was the cost of a private investigator's final hour, setting the recorder. The recording was not made to expose them to the world, but to protect me in a court of law. The evidence of the $5,000 petty cash theft, sealed and documented, was the ultimate piece of character evidence, proving their motive was predatory greed, not perceived fairness. Dad's legacy was not the hardware store or the millions. His legacy was the quiet, meticulous loyalty he showed to the child who was loyal to him, and the final, devastating truth he left behind. In the end, Laura and David accomplished exactly the opposite of what they intended. They wanted $1 million each in control over the whole estate. Instead, they destroyed the reputation of their father, lost over $350,000 in legal costs, and were left with a pittance, a stark, humiliating reminder of the real cost of greed. I never heard from them again. I had sealed the door, locked the vault, and finally put the inheritance betrayal to rest. The silence in my life was worth more than the $2 million I received. It was the sound of peace, purchased dearly by my father's foresight and my own unforgiving resolve. The final wire transfers were complete by Friday, November 17th, 2023. When I looked at my bank balance, a figure that topped $2 million, I didn't feel the joy of wealth. I felt the cold, immense weight of what it had cost. The money was the trophy of a war I never wanted to fight, purchased with the permanent loss of my only surviving siblings. The immediate aftermath was a strange, silent purgatory. The legal battle had been an all-consuming fire, giving me purpose, focus, and a channel for my grief and anger. Now the fire was out. The silence in my life, once a desired refuge from Laura's shrieking entitlement and David's desperate plotting, became deafening. I had won definitively. I had the money, the validation of Dad's will, and the moral high ground confirmed by a federal judge. But the victory fell hollowed out by the realization that my family had been a lie. For the first few weeks, I slept poorly, haunted by the muffled sound of David's cynical laughter on the recording, the sound of their November 18th, 2022 betrayal echoing in the small study. The sacred space, closing the house. The final task of executorship was the family home. Dad's will stipulated that I could either purchase the house from the estate or sell it, adding the proceeds to the liquid assets. I chose to keep it, but not to live in it. It was too heavy with memory and, now, the invisible stain of betrayal. The house became my project for closure. I spent the month of December 2023 there, alone, cleaning and sorting. I wasn't purging. I was performing an emotional excavation. I spent days in the study, the scene of the crime, and the discovery. I meticulously cleaned out Dad's desk, finding old report cards, silly Father's Day cards from when we were kids, and a dog-eared photo of him and Mom on their honeymoon. These small artifacts, untouched by the greed of his final years, were the real inheritance. The recorder he had used was gone, legally retained as evidence, but I remembered where he must have hidden it, under a heavy paisley cushion. I threw the cushion away. I needed to sanitize the space, to remove the physical echoes of the conspiracy. The smell of pipe tobacco, once comforting, now felt like a melancholy reminder of his final, lonely strategy session. I decided to convert the house into a scholarship foundation office, using a portion of my inheritance. It was a symbolic gesture, turning the site of ultimate family breakdown into a place that fosters future success for community kids who couldn't afford college. Dad would have loved it. It was a tangible way to restore the good faith his other children had so thoroughly destroyed. I never told my children the ugly details of the legal battle. They only knew Grandpa left me the store and some money, and that their aunt and uncle had moved far away. I protected them from the knowledge of their family's capacity for betrayal. A kindness Dad, in his foresight, had protected me from until it was absolutely necessary. The final symbolic strike. 3 months after the final wire transfer, in February 2024, the silence was broken one final time, not by Laura or David, but by Aunt Clara. She called, sounding incredibly weary. "Mark, I have to tell you something. I was sworn to silence by your lawyer, but I can't hold it." "What is it, Aunt Clara?" I asked, bracing myself. "Laura," she whispered. "She called me again 2 weeks ago. She knows the suit is over, but she keeps asking me to confirm Dad was confused. She wanted me to call a local paper to expose the injustice and get my side of the story out. She's still trying to spin the narrative, Mark. Even after the court ruled, even after the recording." I closed my eyes. This was the final, devastating piece of evidence of their unfixable character. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were only sorry they got caught. They hadn't accepted the judgment of the court or the judgment of their father's own words. They were consumed by a deep, fundamental denial of their own malice. "Thank you, Aunt Clara," I said. I needed to know that. That conversation sealed the door forever. The last sliver of guilt, the thought that maybe I was too harsh, too unforgiving, vanished. They hadn't learned, hadn't changed, and were still actively trying to destroy Dad's reputation to justify their catastrophic greed. The unsent letter. A cleansing. I needed one final cleansing ritual. On a cold evening in March 2024, I sat at my home computer and typed a letter to Laura and David. It was not intended to be sent. It was written solely for my own spiritual execution of the relationship. Dear Laura and David, I know you believe I stole from you. I know you believe Dad was unfair. You are wrong. You were left what Dad intended, which was a chance to rebuild your lives after years of your own poor decisions. You chose instead to plot the destruction of his reputation and to commit felony theft against his business. The recording is the truth. The court order is the consequence. You claimed I was selfish. But selfishness is spending $100,000 on a frivolous lawsuit built on a lie when you are already drowning in debt. Selfishness is asking me, the executor, to disregard my oath to Dad's final wishes. You mourn the loss of your inheritance. I mourn the loss of my siblings. But you destroyed the right to be my family the moment you turn on Dad and me. You paid $353,750 for $221,250. A terrible, tragic bargain. The price was not the money, however. The price was permanent banishment. I forgive Dad for having to make that terrible choice. I forgive myself for having to follow through. I do not forgive either of you. I read the letter 4 times, deleting lines of anger and adding lines of cold, hard fact. Then I highlighted the entire document and hit the delete key, emptying the digital trash bin immediately afterward. The act of writing it was enough. The only communication they would ever receive was the silence. The weight of silence. Over the course of the following year, the memory of the betrayal faded from a burning injury to a dull scar. The money, managed responsibly, provided a stable, invisible foundation for my family's future. The security was the true gift. I realized then that Dad's greatest act of loyalty wasn't leaving me the lion's share. It was his determination to ensure the truth, the unpleasant truth, would survive him. He forced a confrontation, knowing that only a public, legal exposure could compel them to face the consequences of their malice, thereby protecting me from their endless, corrosive drama. The final tally of the war was simple. They lost their dignity, their financial stability, and the last shred of their father's good opinion. I gained the freedom that only the truth, painful as it was, can provide. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was clean. It was the sound of a contract officially terminated, and a life finally, truly, in peace. It was the sound of Dad's final, victorious checkmate. The silence I bought with the legal fight became the most valuable asset in the entire estate. 2 years passed. It is now May 2026. The immense, cold weight of the $2,043,750 mark received has settled into a comfortable, secure foundation. It did not buy luxury, it bought peace. My architectural firm is thriving, not because I invested the inheritance directly into it, but because the elimination of my business debt, secured in January 2024, freed up capital and, more importantly, my mind. I was no longer fighting a war on 2 fronts. I was simply building things. My wife and children are happy, secure in the knowledge that they are safe from financial ruin. The inheritance never became a point of contention. It became an invisible shield. The true legacy, the Davies Foundation. The greatest healing, however, happened at the place of the deepest wound, Dad's house. As planned in August 2024, I officially opened the doors of the Richard Davies Community Scholarship Foundation. We converted the large family house into a small, welcoming office space. The study, where the conspiratorial audio was recorded and the painful legal documents were signed, became the foundation's library, a silent, sacred space filled with books on architecture, business, and local history. The irony was not lost on me. My father's house, which his entitled children had plotted to sell and liquidate, was now a protected community asset, fulfilling a higher purpose. It was Dad's final, perfect answer to their greed. turning the sight of their malice into a perennial engine of good faith. The foundation has, as of this date, funded 12 full tuition scholarships for deserving high school seniors in Willow Creek. Every time I sign a check or shake the hand of a scholarship recipient in the former study, I feel Dad's quiet approval. This is the real victory. This is how I ensured his legacy wasn't just metal and money, but meaning. The final failures, the price paid. I promised myself I would never seek them out, but in a small town, news always finds its way back. The final, pathetic fates of Laura and David trickled in, confirming that their character was not merely bent, but fundamentally broken. Laura Evans. The ruin of entitlement in late 2025, about 2 years after the legal judgment, I received news of Laura through Rose, my stepsister. The $110,625 she walked away with was not nearly enough to save her life. Her husband, unable to forgive her complicity in the $5,000 petty cash theft, which had become a toxic secret between them, exposed during their own internal discovery, filed for divorce. The stress of the lawsuit, the punitive financial sanctions, and the exposure of her character proved too much. She lost the house Dad helped her buy. She had to sell all her expensive suburban possessions to pay off outstanding debts. The last I heard, she had moved 2 states over, renting a small apartment and working a minimum wage job, a complete, humiliating reversal of the entitled life she had so ruthlessly fought to maintain. She had spent a lifetime believing she deserved everything, only to lose everything because of that belief. David Davies. The reckless end. David's end was swifter and more predictable. After the $110,625 disbursement, he immediately took the money, ignored his creditors, and started another ridiculous venture, a specialized organic smoothie company targeting dog owners. It lasted 5 months. His business failed spectacularly in early 2025, leaving him deeper in debt than ever before. He tried to claim bankruptcy, but the documented history of financial fraud and the previous judgments against him made it difficult. The $5,000 theft, though small, had left a permanent, digital shadow on his record. The last piece of news came in June 2025. David was forced to move back to Willow Creek, living in a single room above an old garage, completely cut off and financially broken. He had returned to the very town he always scorned, a penniless pariah. Their final states were not a source of satisfaction, but a grim confirmation. Their fate was sealed not by the will, but by their character. They had brought the entire catastrophe upon themselves. The final tally of the betrayal. In the end, the story was never about the $2.3 million in liquid assets. It was about loyalty and foresight. I look back now and understand the final, subtle genius of Dad's plan. He didn't just want me to win. He wanted to ensure they were punished by their own greed. By leaving a will that heavily favored me, he knew he would trigger their conspiracy. By recording their malice and documenting the petty theft, he provided the ammunition necessary not just to defend the will, but to levy the massive legal sanctions. They forced the court to judge them, and the court judged them harshly. They paid the financial cost, over $350,000 in sanctions and fees, leaving them with pennies. The reputational cost, the public record of the lawsuit, the audio recording, and the $5,000 theft now followed them like ghosts. The relational cost, permanent, irreversible banishment from the only remaining part of the family that was stable and secure. The ultimate conclusion. My father taught me that family is defined by loyalty, not just blood. He gave them ample resources and repeated chances. When they used those chances to plot against him and against me, he drew the line. He used his final days not mourning his death, but planning my defense. The weight of silence is heavy, but it is clean. It is the peace that comes from knowing you fought honorably, defended the truth, and secured the legacy of the one person who truly believed in you. The $2,043,750 was the reward, but the peace was the prize. That peace, purchased at the cost of family, was worth every single penny. It was Dad's final, victorious checkmate, played from beyond the grave.